Welcome back. It is SEC Media Days brought to you by our friends at Work Trucks with an X, LLC.com. And also we thank our friends at Volunteer Automotive Group, where winners shop. This guy's a winner. Andy Staples of On 3 joining us now. How are you, buddy?
Good.
This is one of my oldest friends in the media biz. We go back a long ways. I think we go back to when the SEC was eight teams.
I don't believe it was 8 teams. I think we were in middle school. Well, no, I was a freshman in high school when they went to 12.
I was graduating.
Okay.
In 92?
Yeah.
So I'm about 4 years older than you.
Yeah, I remember going to South Carolina's first SEC game at the Swamp.
Mm-hmm.
They'd been in the league, but that was their first year in the SEC, so it was their first time at Florida as a conference opponent. Should have won that game, too. Lost 14-9.
Are you old enough to remember that time and the A&M Missouri time? That to me, they both, I know you're old enough for that one, but the ones that kind of felt like, oh, these are neat. Texas and Oklahoma, that
feels very different. Yeah. Now it's interesting because Texas A&M came in guns blazing, and you had the Johnny Manziel Heisman year to start out.
True.
And actually, Missouri had a really good run at the beginning because we forget how good Gary Pinkel was. Like they won the East in 13 and 14, and that 13 team was really good, but it's not the same thing. It's not the same brands. I mean, you're porting the Red River rivalry into the SEC, so you're adding, think about Tennessee at Oklahoma. For Oklahoma's first conference game. That's going to be wild. And then Oklahoma turns around and goes to Auburn. Just seeing those logos together gets your blood pumping.
No doubt. If I ask you tiers of the SEC as you view it.
We were just talking about this a few minutes ago.
Oh, really?
Okay.
Mm-hmm. I like that. Who's on the uppermost tier that can win a championship this year?
Well, Georgia, Alabama, Texas. And the more I talk to people, the more I think Ole Miss might be on that tier.
I hear the same thing.
So it's interesting because I've sort of shifted the way I view this because I used to think purely input. Like, what are your recruiting rankings? How good is the raw material you're putting in? Obviously, development's important. But, watching the way Michigan won last year, I was like, okay, we need to adjust the thinking on this. Basically, what we need to be saying is how many NFL players are on these rosters,
okay,
and where are they going to get drafted? Like, are they going to be a bunch of first, second, third round draft picks? Are they going to be a bunch of fifth, sixth round draft picks? What are we talking about here? And Michigan was a great example of that. That was a team that had multiple first round draft picks, that had 13 draft picks. You go back to those Georgia teams that won the 2 previous titles, just incredibly loaded at the top, incredibly loaded with old guys that were about to go pro. That's what Ole Miss is this year. I talked to Jim Nagy from the Senior Bowl. He's had 20 guys with draftable grades at Ole Miss, which is very similar to Michigan last year. And that's not what they've ever been able to do before. They've never had anything like that before. You heard Nick Saban say it. When Nick Saban says he thinks that they have beefed up enough on the line to be competitive with Alabama and Georgia, I believe him. I mean, he's not just saying that for clicks. It's Nick freaking Saban.
Yeah, I don't think he needs clicks at this point in his career. Now, I agree with that. I look at the second tier, though, and I wonder, because obviously a lot of my listeners follow Tennessee, where you think they fall in that second tier?
Right at the top of it.
Okay.
Tennessee, Missouri, LSU, Oklahoma. Those are the ones that absolutely should be talking about making the playoff, should feel confident that if they have a good season, they'll make the playoff. And I think Tennessee especially, and Missouri especially, got schedule draws that help with that. It's still hard. I mean, look, you're Tennessee, you still have to play Alabama and Georgia. You got to deal with that. But imagine you split those games. You got a little wiggle room. I think the NC State game will be really interesting too. I think that's a pretty tough one. I think they're going to be fairly competitive in the ACC this year, so be a really good test early on for Tennessee. But I in my post-spring top 25, I had Tennessee. What if I had them number 10 or number 11? Which, if you wind up there, you make the playoff.
Yeah. You were a superstar offensive lineman at Florida. People don't know that.
Human tackling dummy.
Human tackling dummy. But in all seriousness, how much can the other guys, especially an offensive line, help a young quarterback like Nico?
Oh, a ton. And the running game itself should help Nico. And like it's funny because you talk about young guys. Lance Hurd's a young guy too, but Lance Hurd's going to help Nico quite a bit. This is a guy who, had he not been playing for LSU last year, would have never transferred. He would just be starting at where he was. But he happened to be playing at LSU, which happens to have Will Campbell and Emory Jones coming back for their third and probably final years. And so he couldn't afford to sit for another year. Like, he needed to go somewhere where he could play. And Lance Hurd's going to be an awesome offensive tackle in the SEC. So that's a big one. Cooper Mays, I think Cooper Mays is the most important player on this team. I think keep him healthy and things are going to work. That running game's going to work. No, I don't, like, Nico being young, I'm not as worried about that after watching the bowl game. Because I felt like he just took what the defense gave him. He didn't try to overextend. He didn't try to be Superman. And that's against the defense. Like, Iowa didn't have Cooper DeJean because he was hurt, but they had pretty much the whole rest of the defense. So that's a really good defense that is exceptionally well coached. So he's dealing with an opponent where everybody's exactly where they need to be to defend him perfectly, and he's making the right choices. And I think that's very telling. So I'm excited to see what he can do because Tennessee's offense was very limited.
Very.
They stayed out of the middle of the field. It was dink or bomb, and then the run game, you didn't do much read option. That eliminates the RPO. If you don't feel comfortable in the read option, you don't feel comfortable with RPOs. There's so much more Tennessee can do now. And the thing is, like, Nico doesn't have to win the Heisman. If you get Hendon Hooker-like production out of Nico, Tennessee's a potential playoff team.
Yep, I agree. Andy Staples on 3 does a great job with his podcast, and people can follow you on where?
The On3 Sports YouTube channel is where you can find the show if you would like to watch it. If you do not want to look at my face, that's fine. I understand.
He's a handsome guy.
Everywhere you get podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts is gone, so it's on YouTube now. But we are everywhere.
He is Andy Staples. I'm Dave Hooker. Coverage continues from SEC Media Days in Dallas, Texas. Stay tuned off those words.
All right, so one of the things that was discussed there was tiers, and we appreciate Andy Staples for taking the time to join us. Now, here's how I'm going to define tiers, and tell me if you are okay with this. Tier 1, expected to be in the playoff. Tier 2, I think will be in the playoff. Tier 3, very well could be in the playoff. By those tiers, let me ask you, who is in Tier 1? Expect to be in the playoff.
I am with him that Georgia and Alabama and Texas are Tier 1. But Tennessee and LSU should also be Tier 1 and that they should expect to be in the playoff. And
okay. I'm more selective. Tier 1, I'm only Georgia. Because I think Texas, Alabama, and Ole Miss all have some flaws, and I think they'll be battling for that second and potentially third position. So my tier is Georgia only. I expect them to be in. Now, that's my tier. Second tier, think will be in. That's a little bit different. Think will be in. I'm going to take Texas and, of course, Georgia. So I've got 2 schools on my second tier. You see, I'm kind of breaking this down.
No, you have Georgia Tier 1. So Texas and who Tier 2?
Georgia Tier 1. Well, yeah, but I think they'll be in it too. So I expect them to be in it. That's Tier 1. Tier 2, I would have Texas and Alabama. Those would be my 2 schools. And then Tier 3 will include a team that you're well aware of.
Well, so if you're separating by that, Tennessee should at least be Tier 2. And I'm going to this isn't a shot at Andy Staples because this is everybody in media this week. And we actually had to give Greg McElroy credit on the show for this yesterday, Dave. Can I tell you my issue with people's thoughts on Tennessee? My biggest problem with it? And I wrote a column about it.
Sure.
And I said something about it yesterday. Everybody, and Andy Staples himself said it, he's thoroughly convinced that with Nico Iamaleava, Tennessee's going to look more like Hendon Hooker's offense in 2022 than Joe Milton's offense last year, right?
Yes.
Josh Heupel, and nobody's contradicted him on this, has said that Tennessee is significantly deeper on defense this year than they've ever been, right?
Yes.
What was Tennessee's record in 2022?
I think they ended up winning 11 games, right?
11-2. Finished in the top 6, would have been in the 12-team playoff. How in the world can you think that Tennessee's offense is going to return to 2022 form? Can you think their defense is deeper than it was in 2022? But then can you not think that they're actually going to make the playoff, which they would have made in 2022?
It's a great point. You can't say that just the conference is better or anything along those lines, because as a matter of fact, a lot of Tennessee's rivals are down. A lot of the teams that they're playing will be down, and their schedule is incredibly strong. I just think there's this weird hesitancy, and I'm glad you brought it up. And it was a great column, is a great column on offthehooksports.com. There's this hesitancy just to say Nico's the guy. Nobody wants to look like a fool. Nobody wants to look like the guy who drafted Todd Marinovich, which is maybe before your time. But you use the term lab a lot. This was a guy whose dad, literally, when he was 10 years old, put him on creatine and everything else, had him working out and training. He went to the NFL. He was a total burnout. So I think people are worried that they're getting on this Nico train too soon, whereas you and I have been on it a long time and feel like, frankly, you're getting on it too late.
I agree. But even if they don't want to get on my train, which is that Nico is a generational created and allowed quarterback to run Josh Heupel's offense, they're all on the train that he's at least going to return Tennessee to the 2022 offense. And Andy Staples himself, they all believe that Joe Milton held the offense back last year, right? Everybody, that's kind of a consensus among national media. If you think Joe Milton held the offense back and you think Nico Iamaleava is going to return to 2022, why is everybody predicting Tennessee's actual win-loss record to look more like 2023 than 2022?
I cannot explain that. And somebody just posted that FanDuel has changed their number to 8.5. I mean, to me, that's the easiest bet that's out there in the SEC. I thought it was 9. I
thought it was 9.5. Yeah.
Yeah. Somebody on the message board, if it's on FanDuel at 8.5, I don't give out gambling advice. I leave that to Caleb, but I'm going to tell you, jump on that.
I thought it may have started 8.5 and then moved to 9.5. That's kind of what I had thought had happened. But
me too.
Yeah, if it's 8.5, and this is the thing, people are saying one thing about Tennessee that again, we are high on Tennessee. I'm not going to knock somebody who thinks Tennessee may actually have a drop-off and go 8-5. Okay, if you think that, fine, we'll have that conversation. But how can you think that, but at the same time think Nico Iamaleava is going to restore Tennessee's offense to pre-Joe Milton? Those two things don't jive with each other. They don't.
No, I agree. I mean, so their defense should be better. The running game should be better if they stay healthy up front. Nico, everybody believes in. The offense should be as good as 2022, but you don't have them in the playoff. You're right. That's a contradiction.
Yeah, it is a contradiction. It makes no sense.
You can say, I'm not ready for Nico. I don't think Tennessee's a playoff team because I'm not ready for Nico. That would be an argument that at least you could make. But saying that Nico is going to be really good and you believe in him and they're not going to make the playoff doesn't make much sense.
I totally agree.